So in the early 1970s, Bruce Lee was the biggest martial arts star in the world. His stardom was a global phenomenon. It's the type that cinema's only really seen a few times in all its history. But then after his sudden premature death in 1973, the film industry set about looking for who might be the heir to the Bruce Lee throne. There was, of course, the Bruceploitation genre, with a bunch of other martial artists trying to look like Bruce and have sound-alike stage names. We could pause this interview, and if we wanted, we could fill the next hour with just a montage of posters of movies, all trading on the Bruce Lee name. There was even one film that purported to be about a martial arts tournament that would pick the official successor to Bruce. And by the end of that decade, the 1970s, the world, well, the English-speaking world at least, did have its next big martial arts star. And although he did have professional connections to Bruce Lee, he wasn't someone that looked like Bruce. He didn't have a name that sounded similar. He wasn't trying to be like Bruce. It was American-born Carlos Ray Norris, better known as Chuck. And we may only know his name today because he knew he needed a special project to break him out of the throngs of other martial artists who were trying to be movie stars, even if Chuck had to develop this project himself and spend years looking for financing. Yeah, as with almost all show business stories, Chuck's path to film stardom wasn't quick or straightforward. I mean, to hear him tell it, his earliest career ambitions were actually to be a cop. And so he joined the United States Air Force right out of high school, thinking he could be an MP, military police, as a professional stepping stone. Now, the Air Force stationed Chuck in South Korea, where he started studying judo and taekwondo and tong soo do. And by the end of his hitch in the Air Force, Chuck was himself teaching karate. And once back in civilian life, Chuck started in competitive karate in the 1960s. He started winning tournaments, and somewhere along the way, he started sparring with and working out with a certain martial artist who had already flirted with show business, a guy named Bruce Lee. Now, when you think of Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris working together, most people's brains immediately leap to Way of the Dragon, where the two men fight on screen together. But actually, their earliest movie collaboration was The Wrecking Crew, a 1969 Dean Martin spy spoof that gave Bruce his earliest fight choreography gig on a Hollywood film and gave Chuck his earliest on-camera work in a movie, even if it was just a bit part. Right, this is the movie that's now come to be heavily associated with Bruce because of the 2019 Quentin Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but Chuck Norris is involved with it too, playing a one-line role as a henchman who fights the hero in a restaurant scene. Now, there are two stories about how Chuck was cast in the role. One is that Bruce just picked up the phone and offered the role to his pal. The other is that the producer of the movie happened to be in the audience of one of Chuck's tournaments, and that's how he was offered the role. In any case, Chuck, he was going to be in a major motion picture, but the day before he filmed his part, Chuck defended his title at the 1968 International Karate Championship, and fortunately, he was fighting friend and fellow Texan Skipper Mullins. Well, Chuck grew up on the Texas-Oklahoma border, so I consider him an honorary Texas native. Anyways, Chuck requested before the fight, he said, "Hey Skipper, can you go easy on my face? Tomorrow I've got the first movie role of my career." Well, how did that go? Well, Chuck said he successfully defended his title, but that he showed up on the Wrecking Crew set with a black eye. In the end, Chuck didn't like the delivery of his one line. He didn't like his kick over Dean Martin's head. In the first take, it was too low and apparently he connected. And in the take that got used in the film, Chuck overcompensated by kicking way over Dean's head. So he didn't think this acting business, all this acting foolishness, was going to be for him. Then, in 1971, Bruce went off to Hong Kong, where he made two films with a director named Lo Wei, and became an instant sensation in China. Not that Chuck knew this. Chuck just got a surprise phone call in 1972 from Bruce offering him a villain role in Way of the Dragon, which would be the third film that Bruce starred in and the first that Bruce wrote and directed himself, co-produced by Bruce's own company. Yeah, Bruce had gotten that big that quickly. It was titled Way of the Dragon. Well, in much of the world, it was called Return of the Dragon in the US because it was released there after Enter the Dragon. Even though Chuck, the 7-time world karate champion, would have to lose the on-screen fight, and even though he would again only have a single line of dialogue, this film was a great career move because he'd be in a fight that would be the highlight of an important film of the 70s martial arts boom. And because this time he'd get to work hand in hand with Bruce's fight choreography, as it's a little known fact that Bruce actually wasn't on set on the day of Chuck's fight in the Wrecking Crew. If Way of the Dragon was a huge step up for Chuck, his next film role as a karate instructor in The Student Teachers, that was a big step back down. It was actually directed by Jonathan Kaplan, who would go on to make A-list studio movies and get Emmy nominations for his work on ER. But this was only Kaplan's second film, so not surprisingly for the 70s, it was low budget and it was sexploitation. And they probably didn't even cast Chuck Norris because he was Chuck Norris. Yeah, the filmmakers needed a whole class of karate students for a scene, and Chuck was able to bring his brother Aaron, his 2 sons, a handful of students, because Chuck had a successful chain of karate studios around greater Los Angeles, and the filmmakers were shooting in a park in Inglewood, an LA neighborhood. For all we know, they just cracked open the phone directory looking for karate schools. Chuck said he didn't even know the film was released until he happened to be making his next movie in San Francisco a little while later. He checked a newspaper, he saw the student teachers amongst the showtimes, he caught it in a sleazy cinema in a slummy district of San Francisco, and Mr. Norris was horrified. Chuck, who's very publicly religious, has said that he didn't realize the rest of the movie contained sex and nudity when he agreed to do the karate scene at the park, and I tend to believe him. I mean, it'd be one thing if he said that after the fact and only he had appeared in the film, but he brought a whole bunch of kids to be in the movie too, so I tend to believe him. By some measures, Chuck Norris really was breaking into films. You can find newspapers around that time that contain ads for both Return of the Dragon and Student Teachers on the same page. The dude has 2 movies out simultaneously. But in reality, Chuck's life was still a mix of a lot of things, and he was hardly acting like a rising film star. The same year, for instance, he was giving a karate demonstration at a meeting of a local amateur radio club. So I mentioned that Chuck's next film was made in San Francisco. Well, what was that? It was a 1974 Hong Kong film that was shot in the Bay Area, and it showed that Chuck was still getting film roles that were somehow connected to Bruce Lee, even posthumous to Bruce. See, it's been widely reported that this film, Yellow-Faced Tiger, was a project that director Lo Wei was developing as a starring Bruce Lee vehicle back when Bruce was still alive, and that makes sense. Bruce was totally linked to this location. The story was set in San Francisco, where Bruce was born, and then when Bruce moved back to California in his early 20s, he lived right across the bay from San Francisco in Oakland. Anyways, Chuck was cast as the cartoonishly evil villain of Yellow-Faced Tiger, and he didn't like the fact that he was being asked to smoke a cigar on screen in many of his scenes. Dude was, super health conscious in real life. He did not smoke. So even though film roles were still just aberrations in Chuck's career, I think he was starting to think about what sort of image he was projecting. But, no Bruce Lee. So who was going to star in this film? Well, the film was being made by the Hong Kong studio Golden Harvest, the same company that made Bruce's first 3 starring pictures. And now Golden Harvest was looking in America for the next big kung fu star. Like I said, the industry was still trying to fill the void left by Bruce, and they heard about newcomer Don Wong, who had just won a martial arts tournament while going to college in Texas. Golden Harvest flew him to New York for an interview, and he was cast as the lead of Yellow-Faced Tiger and signed to a contract to make more Golden Harvest films. I think Chuck was okay with playing a bad guy and smoking in this film because he honestly thought it wouldn't be seen in his home country. He never voiced his own character in the dubbing, for instance, so he may not have known an English version was ever created. In any case, the film did so poorly that Golden Harvest wanted to end its 3-year contract with Don Wong right then, which Don agreed to. Now, most people say the film didn't get released in North America until after Chuck Norris became a star, but I actually did find 2 cities that screened it back in 1975, Honolulu and Vancouver. Now, Chuck said in a mid-1970s magazine interview that he thought the fad of importing Asian films into the US, he thought that was over, especially with no stars as big as Bruce. And he said in a later TV interview that he was getting sent a lot of those types of kung fu scripts at this time, and they just weren't thrilling his soul. But even though his early acting experiences were a mixed bag, Chuck was starting to feel like he really wanted to give this movie thing an honest go, and he had 2 reasons. He had already conquered competitive karate, and he wanted to set his sights on a big new challenge, that's one. And there's basically nothing more competitive than the film business. But it must have been a tough call to throw all his energy into pursuing a film career because he was still making headlines with karate, like when some promoters offered millions for a fight between Norris and Muhammad Ali. But here's the other reason Norris wanted to switch to movies. Being in the middle of 1970s cinema, which had a lot of anti-heroes and moral relativism, he wanted to give young filmgoers a purely heroic star to look up to, just as he had had with John Wayne. So how to set about doing this? Well, 2 things. In 1974, he started taking acting classes, that's one. And for the second, he needed a good starring vehicle, even if he had to develop it himself. Now, author Warren Murphy, co-creator of the Remo Williams character from the Destroyer series of pulp paperbacks, he said that Chuck tried optioning that character, Remo Williams, for the screen. But Murphy said that his co-creator, his co-writer on the books, envisioned a Dustin Hoffman type in the role instead, so they didn't option their property to the martial artist. So Chuck began developing a story of his own. He said he began hatching the idea with one of his black belts, and that he turned it over to a screenwriter, Joe Fraley, who was willing to come up with a finished script on spec. This is the project that Chuck would pitch to producers over the next few years. This is the project that Chuck would mention in press interviews over the next few years. This is the project known as Good Guys Wear Black. He mentioned it to Fighting Stars magazine in 1976 as being, for him, the right movie at the right time. But it was then being reported, maybe misreported, I don't know, as being about Chuck and a group of narcotics agents, instead of being about Chuck and a group of Vietnam veterans, as it would ultimately end up. Oh, and that magazine interview spent much more time discussing another supposed upcoming Chuck Norris project, Chocolate and Vanilla, which never got made. Chocolate and Vanilla, it seems like it was going to be an action comedy buddy picture, the subgenre he eventually tackled a decade later with Firewalker. And he had other projects that felt like dead ends too. He appeared in the martial arts documentary, The Warrior Within, that didn't get properly released until years later. And the producer of that doc, a guy named Bob Plone, shot a TV talk show pilot with Chuck called Black Belt with Chuck Norris that never got picked up, never got made into a series. So Chuck had been in acting classes for a couple of years, and he had encouragement from movie stars like Steve McQueen, who was his karate student. He was getting pitched projects left and right, martial arts stuff mostly, but nothing was making him a household name, and he couldn't get Good Guys Wear Black off the ground. So it's easy to see why he leapt at the offer of what ended up becoming his next film, Breaker Breaker. It was a film that capitalized on the CB radio craze that was then exploding, and although he would get to put his fighting skills to good use, it was a chance to break away from the karate pigeonhole. He got to play a hero, unlike Yellow-Faced Tiger, and remember how he hated to be shown smoking on screen in Yellow-Faced Tiger? In Breaker Breaker, he plays a healthy living truck driver, and the only time we see him eating in the film, he's having a salad. And he got paid exponentially more than he did for Yellow-Faced Tiger, which he really needed at the time. And why shouldn't he get paid a lot more? This time he wasn't only starring, but finally serving as his own fight choreographer, after having worked under Bruce's fight choreography in his first two films, and under the choreography and yellow-faced tiger of a Hong Kong fight coordinator, someone who had worked on Bruce's first 2 Hong Kong films. But now for the bad. The very thing that Chuck liked about the film's premise, the trucker movie genre getting him away from chopsocky, that was also a downside. When the film was announced, they made a big deal about the movie focusing on CB radios, even claiming to be the first. And when it was released, it was advertised as a trucker movie, not a Chuck Norris movie, although the French poster was at least smart enough to indicate that there was a martial artist in it. Now, the film is mainly set in a small California town with an illegal speed trap and a truck impound racket that's all being run by this corrupt judge. But instead of shooting the film in a real town, the film's limited budget had them shooting on a Western movie set, and they just asked the audience to believe that a modern-day town is somehow that primitive. And for better or for worse, Chuck said the movie didn't even screen in Los Angeles. So Chuck had acted in another film, this time as the lead, and he still wasn't a star. He had to get Good Guys Wear Black made. And if he was going to throw his all into this project, why make it just one movie? Chuck told the LA Times in 1977 that his Good Guys character, Booker, was supposed to be an ongoing part for a film series, and that the character would be like a combination between Dirty Harry and Bruce Lee and James Bond. When Chuck finally found the right producers and investors and the film got funded, it was clear this project was going to be different. He was assigned a special acting coach just for the production. His body hair, which had stayed wild in previous films, was now groomed. The director was Ted Post, who had already helmed 2 critical films for tough guy superstar Clint Eastwood. And Chuck was surrounded by a tremendous cast. He had soon-to-be Oscar-nominated Anne Archer as his leading lady, and he was surrounded by recognizable Hollywood veterans. I mean, at one point in the film, this karate guy, Chuck Norris, is doing a scene with film noir legend Dana Andrews and Rebel Without a Cause actor Jim Backus, who may or may not have played a millionaire castaway on a certain TV series. And it put Chuck in scenes with another actor who had a strong Bruce Lee connection, James Franciscus, because James Franciscus had starred in a 1971 TV series, Longstreet, where Bruce was, you know, a recurring semi-regular character. When the film was done, a company called American Cinema Releasing picked it up for distribution. And keep in mind that Chuck was utterly devoted to making this film a hit, so American Cinema Releasing decided to four-wall the film, meaning renting the cinema it screened at, but then keeping all the box office. And Chuck traveled the country, appearing in person with the movie and doing interviews with any press that would talk to him. I mean, this must have run him ragged, as American Cinema Releasing released the film city by city, blitzing each market with late-night TV advertising as they went along over the course of the next year. Martial arts publications were using Chuck's 2 starring roles as proof that American chopsocky movies were booming. Chuck, meanwhile, was distancing Good Guys from martial arts, warning filmgoers that it'd only be a single karate fight. And that's part of the reason he believed so much in this film. It was an attempt to break him out of martial arts typecasting, move more into the territory of just a general tough guy actor. And Good Guys Wear Black wouldn't be the last time Norris played a Vietnam veteran. Oh, and that's probably the other reason this film was so important to him. Anytime he played a non-vet, it must have had a certain significance, as Chuck's brother, Wieland, was killed in action during the Vietnam conflict. The film was a big hit for American Cinema Releasing, allowing them to grow as a company and to move more into film production. So they produced, not just distributed, but produced Chuck's next 2 films, A Force of One for a 1979 release and The Octagon for a 1980 release. So here we are at 1980. Chuck's enough of a star, and so it was time for companies to dredge up his earlier roles and see what extra money could be made from them. Breaker Breaker was re-released that year on a double bill with the South African martial arts film Kill or Be Killed. Notice that the trucker angle has been dropped from the promotion, which paid off with a profitable 6 weeks in key urban markets. I sort of wonder if the hilariously titled Action Forever German release of the film was also from around this time, as it sure was not playing up the trucker thing either. Then again, maybe Germany never got in on the CB radio craze. There's no evidence Chuck really minded the fact that Breaker Breaker hit theaters again, but then again he probably signed a proper camera release back when he made it, so he would have been powerless to block this re-release even if he wanted to, so I'm guessing he was at peace with that one. But he did not like the fact that Yellow-Faced Tiger resurfaced in 1981 as Slaughter in San Francisco. See, reportedly he made Yellow-Faced Tiger for barely any money and with no signed contract. And like I said, he never dubbed his part in English, presuming it wouldn't even play in America. So in 1981, Chuck had legitimate concerns that an old, low-budget, dubbed Hong Kong movie where he played the villain would damage his career if it was presented as a new Chuck Norris film. Now, his most recent film had been The Octagon, right? And in some territories, Yellow-Faced Tiger in 1981 was being marketed as the return of the Octagon. So he took efforts to block the release, and I'm not sure if that had anything to do with this, but in San Francisco's home state of California, instead of being called Slaughter in San Francisco, it was titled The Boss for some reason. And Chuck clearly felt very strongly about not letting this movie damage his career, because he continued with attempts to block the film on into the home video age, both under Slaughter in San Francisco and under the new VHS title, Karate Cop. Anyway, it was now 1981 and American cinema releasing, even though Chuck Norris was sort of their breadwinner, decided to go in a different direction, not make any more Chuck pictures. Yeah, they were one of those companies who grew beyond their natural limits and then very quickly imploded. So instead, Chuck made Eye for an Eye for a different mid-sized company in 1981, before making not one, but two major studio films in 1982. That's right, he made Silent Rage for Columbia and Forced Vengeance for MGM. It had been 14 years since he made The Wrecking Crew, his last studio film, back when he was a bit player, so now Chuck, a leading man, truly had brought his film career full circle. He kept at filmmaking for decades, of course, with hits on both the big screen and small, and in 2011, he came out of semi-retirement to appear in what will likely be his final role in a wide-release action film, The Expendables 2. And his character name in the film is Booker. Surely as an homage to his Good Guys Wear Black character. Yeah, surely the part that Chuck considered his true star-making role. Alright, let's see here. Did anyone ever make a film about the Remo Williams character? Yeah, they did. They made a version in 1985 with the biggest motion picture star of all time, Fred Ward. What happens if I confuse the Chuck Norris Karate Cop with the David Carradine Karate Cop? Well, just remember that neither Chuck nor Carradine actually played the eponymous Karate Cops in their respective films, so just consider them the Don Wong and the Ron Marchini Karate Cops. Maybe it'll be easier to keep them straight. But now you want to talk Carradine and Norris and overlapping titles? Both Chuck's Forced Vengeance and David's Armed Response, they were filmed under the working title The Jade Jungle. How about that? They both were. How can you think that Chuck didn't know the Student Teachers was going to have TNA? There was already a similar movie called The Student Nurses from the same company. Alright, you want to talk precedents? Let's talk precedents. The last time that Chuck Norris appeared on screen in something about teachers, it was on the Wholesome School show, Room 222. And who played his karate student in that episode? Eric Lanaville. And why is that significant? Because Eric Lanaville also plays the kid that Chuck takes under his wing in A Force of One, almost a decade later. Now I realize I didn't really answer your question, but dig my trivia one-upsmanship. Isn't it interesting that Chuck did a spaghetti western style final fight in Breaker Breaker years before he did a spaghetti western style final fight in Lone Wolf McQuade? Yeah, right down to sand being thrown in his eyes in both scenes. But you know, everything builds on what went before. Chuck's final fight in Breaker Breaker is being watched by a horse, and that has echoes of Bruce's final fight with Chuck in Way of the Dragon, which is being watched by a cat. So, like I say, everything builds on what went before. Have you noticed that Chuck's hair color seems to change in The Good Guys Wear Black posters and ads, depending on which version you see? Is that just a difference in how they came off different printing presses? Or, as I indicated, this was a film where a lot of care was taken in crafting Chuck's image as a star. So, were they testing different versions? I don't know. But I don't think they were locked into any one look on the posters, because, after all, the film wasn't titled Good Guys Go Blonde.